Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Steve Clemons. I'm editor-at-large of The Hill in Washington, D.C., and somewhat of a regular. I'm trying to become a regular at the Tatra Summit. I hope the GLOBSEC organizers are hearing that. I've loved meeting all of you, love this environment, and love that we have so many smart and thoughtful economic practitioners who also think about foreign policy and national security issues. So it's a great mix of folks. This is the last session, but it's not the least important topic. In fact, in many ways, it's one of the most important topics. Today, we're discussing democracies in disorder in the new geopolitics and how to uphold the West. It's a really interesting question. In December, I know this is a broad country thing, but President Biden in the United States is going to host a summit for democracy, and it's raised a lot of interesting questions. Is Xi Jinping going to, host the summit of the non-democracies? He's raised a lot of questions of who's in, who's out, what the line is, why should we care, why are democracies feeling beleaguered and knocked down, and we're going to have a very smart conversation about that. Let me tell you about our panel. We have Elsa Pilichowski, who's head of public governance at the OECD. She's been there for 21 years, has all sorts of thoughtful provocations on this front. Carl Bildt, the former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Sweden, now the co-chair of the European Council on Foreign Relations. The only guy here, I think, taller than I am, and I respect that, Carl. Ivan Korčok, who is, of course, the Foreign Minister of Slovakia, the much-loved former ambassador of Slovakia to Washington, but we'll leave that aside. And then finally, Marta, Poślad, who's head of the CEE, the Central and Eastern European Division in Transatlantic Public Policy at Google, and based now in Warsaw. So let me just open up with a question that I want to throw to Ivan and really everyone. I think this question of, how do we put fuel back in the tank of liberal democracy? When you see China today, and you see Xi Jinping just sort of comfortably whacking, the heads of big companies and, quite comfortable in his place in the world, in my sense. When you look at Russia's provocations in the world, I was just in the Balkans, and you look at the military exercise there and the intimidation that many of the Baltics are feeling right now. Russia and China look like they're not having any problems. You could look at other parts of the world and ask, how's autocracy doing? Not badly, you'd have to say, if you were objective. But if you look at democracies, everyone's saying we have to restore democracy, we have to rebuild it, we have to remind people of what democracy delivers. And so I guess my question to you is from Slovakia's position, or from all of your position, how do people, citizens in liberal democracy, supposed to look at this? How do we refuel, and how are you supposed to look at the world as it is right now? Does liberal democracy look like a solvent form of government for the future?
Well, thank you, Steve, and many thanks to the organizers for bringing us all here together in this beautiful scenery behind us. I think the title of this panel is, if I may help myself with that, is Democracies in Disorder in the New Geopolitics, How to Uphold the West. And I'm referring to it because I'd like to link it. Your question about liberal democracies and the West and how to uphold it. First, we have to have clarity about the situation in which the West is finding itself on a global scene. And in my view, the clarity about that is as follows. First, our opponents, or those who are questioning international liberal order, are sending a clear message of challenge to the West and trying to portray the West as less capable of meeting and dealing with the challenges globally that we are facing. So it's obvious that opponents of that system that has made us strong, the West, are questioning the West's ability to deal with that. Second, they are successfully dividing us from outside the West. We are not the West as a whole. We are not the West as I understood it. We would like to see it. The fact, however, is that this divisive activities, they not only come from outside, they do come from inside of our Western community as well. Let's put it as it is, that messages actually questioning liberal democracy as such are coming from within, including from this very region, from Central and Eastern Europe, where there are some who believe that liberal democracy is a synonym of decadent Western values. We are confronted with this type of messages, and that's very, very bad. And thirdly, in my own perspective, I'll be very open here, maybe I'll go beyond diplomatic language. I am now a bit more uncertain about position of the West and of global scene as we speak than I was enthusiastic at the beginning of the year following the change of US administration. I'm not saying that I expected more of togetherness of the West with the new American administration. I'm not saying that we are more divided because we are not.
Just to clarify, what did the U.S. not do that you thought would have moved it further along?
The picture of balance sheet of this year after U.S. government came to office is mixed, I would say, because we cannot underestimate the fact that U.S. is back. U.S. returned to institutions. By the way, we've seen yesterday a very good example of Western leadership with this breakthrough on global taxation of companies. Had there not been US leadership and change of their position, there would not have been this major breakthrough under Matthias Cormann leadership yesterday. Yet we cannot ignore negative impact of at least the way how the Afghanistan mission ended. And let me say here, it's not only a problem how our adversaries and opponents see us, the end of this Afghan mission. The problem is that we cannot justify the way how it ended back home. This is the problem as well. And two, here I don't have a definitive position on it. It's what impact will it have in the long or mid-term perspective, the AUKUS, the Australia, United Kingdom and US partnership. Why I maintain my position, I understand what they did and why they did so.
Right.
Nevertheless, we'll see what impact that will have on what we would like to see, more unity of West globally. I'll stop by saying that maybe it will not be, as I naively believed and hoped in at the beginning of this year, that West as a whole will try to do things together. Maybe we will see continued fragmentation of the West. We will see maybe the American West, European West, Indo-Pacific West. And here I have some doubts whether we will be better off with this approach of the West in confrontation with the challenges globally. And about liberal democracy, I can speak endlessly, so I have tried to control myself about it. But I refer to the fact, yes, there are voices coming from within Western community regarding liberal democracy, and there are very strong voices also coming from here, from the Central European region.
But how would you refuel it, Ivan?
Through clear positions to that. I have a clear position to it, which, by the way, caused that I am described as a decadent proponent of Western values when I say that I believe in liberal democracy. The problem is that populists and demagogues simply manage to portray a picture as if liberal democracy would be the same what we understand under liberalism, which is completely bullshit, by the way.
Yeah.
So this is the problem, and we can refuel only if we stick to what makes liberal democracy such a successful concept, namely rule of law at its heart. Isn't that, for me, it's shocking, in fact, that 30 years after 1989 and so on, rule of law becomes divisive issue within European Union. Rule of law becomes divisive issue within this region. There are cracks, in this community when we say that we should stick to rule of law, that we should discuss rule of law as a criterion within European Union. You can only refuel if you believe in that, and if you show that belief and demonstrate. That's what I'm trying to do.
Right. Before I get to Elsa and Marta, I want to ask Carl, you talk to so many people across the transatlantic relationship around the world and in the European Council on Foreign Relations. I'm interested not only in your thoughts on this question of how liberal democracies refuel and what citizens feel about the time they're in, but I'd just like to know if you were to basically imagine what the poll was among the people you encounter about this question? What's the level of cynicism versus optimism?
Well, there's a level of hate and concern.
So cynicism is high.
Well, I wouldn't call it cynicism, I would call it concern. When they look at some of the global trends, not necessarily all of the global trends, because we are living in a period of profound challenges, transitions, uncertainties, and that leads to concern. Concern, are we going to be able to manage this? Are our political systems going to be okay? Our economy is going to be okay in these hugely tumultuous time in which we are living? It has to be said, to be somewhat outside of the conventional wisdom, I belong to those that are fairly confident in our system. I mean, I've spent quite some time in the last few weeks discussing with Russians of different political persuasions. Do I find any Russians who really see their society and political system as a model for the world? Well, I haven't detected anyone. I'm quite certain. I've not been inside the Kremlin for some time. But outside of the Kremlin, you have difficulties finding them. Do the Chinese see their model as something for the world? I mean, they are intensely nationalistic, the Chinese, whatever their political persuasions, by the way, and proud of their nations and whatever. But are they on a rampart across the world to impose a Marxist model of governance of Sweden and Slovakia? I haven't seen that as of yet. And I do think, as a matter of fact, if you look at the big issues that are ahead of us, the green transition, the digital transition, all of that we've talked about, I think that open societies and open economies have basically the best conditions for managing it. It doesn't mean that we will be able to succeed in everything, but we are the best positioned. And then to be slightly unconventional as well, the place that worries me in terms of the future of the credibility of democracy is a place fairly close to you. I'm less concerned with China, less concerned with Russia in terms of the future of democracy than I'm with what might happen in the US in 2024. If you face an election that is now not only divisive in terms of that or that, that's what democracy is all about, but about trust in the entire system and in the operating of the system, that could be very difficult to have.
I completely agree, but I'll agree with you also on China and Russia maybe not having this messianic commitment to transform everyone in the world. I tell everybody, it's interesting if you look at science fiction. Sometimes there are good metaphors in there, and one of the metaphors you had in there was essentially, if you guys have watched Star Trek in the past, one of the enemies was the Borg. So you either wipe out your enemy or you assimilate them. And I said, that's America. No, not really. But I think there's an interesting question where if you talk to Sergei Karaganov, who maybe is close to Putin, not close to Putin, you talk to leading Chinese intellectuals, while I agree with you, at the same time they all are, and for years have been dismissive about the chances of democracy succeeding in this era. And if I were an honest and completely objective person assessing this, I would have to say that so far they've been right or wrong, more right than wrong. And while I know history doesn't move in straight lines, I would associate my views, closely with Ivan Korčok. So I'm interested that they are enjoying this moment and watching us self-decline, if you will.
I can see some Chinese being fairly sort of convinced that they've done fairly well, which to some extent is absolutely true. But how have they done well? They have done well by liberalizing their economy and their society. That's what they've done. They've freed up the tremendous entrepreneurial spirit of the Chinese nation, as we've seen previously in Singapore and Taiwan and X numbers of places. And the more they've liberalized, the better they've done it. And that's extremely impressive. They're going to be the most powerful economy in the world within a couple of years. If they go back on that, and their tendencies to that, they're going to do less well. Russia has done miserable. I mean, I remember sort of X numbers of years ago when we were talking with the Russians quite a lot on official level on a partnership for modernization with Russia. I think that was an extremely good thing.
No, I don't think so.
Well, sort of the slogan. Now we have neither partnership nor modernization for Russia.
Right.
But that was sort of messianistic approach on the side of the European Union, believing that we can modernize Russia from outside.
No, but we can help them to modernize. But if they don't want to modernize, we can't really
But then the
help.
response 2014 was Ukraine,
Well, let's see what the OECD has to say.
That's another issue.
That's another issue.
Yeah, so,
Still, I agree.
So Elsa, you sit on the world's greatest reservoirs of data, and you've been watching these nations within the OECD forever. So what is the secret sauce to refueling a liberal democracy and pushing reset in a way that's compelling and convincing? Is there anything within your institution that gives us that answer?
Yes, thank you very much. So let me just start by rebounding a little bit on the international tax agreement, because I actually think this is the best news for democracies that we've had in a long time. The US was a very big player, but so were many EU democracies as well. So it's one of those things that shapes the future world in terms of the standards that democracies hold on to. The second thing I want to say is that really democracy is hard work. It's never a given. The issue is that, yes, there is low trust, that we have lost, democracies have lost some parts of the population that are dissociating themselves from the traditional democratic mechanisms. So the idea is, how do we regain that part of the population? And Secretary of State Blinken this week at the OECD said, democracies, it's not about what we are against, it's about what we stand for. And I think this is what refueling is about. It's about what do we stand for as a collective. And we have three ways of looking at it. We see three main threats. The first one is really something not structural, but it's something that really amplifies the problem. It's misinformation, disinformation, and how this fits in providing, fueling, hatred and fueling parts of the population dissociating themselves. The second one is really participation and representation. We're at a stage where democracies have to absolutely modernize to increase representation, participation, how we make decision-making in our democracies. And the third one, and it's been touched upon, is about how democracies are able to work together on global challenges. So, of course, this is related to the international tax agreement, but climate is another issue. What we are seeing is that one of the reasons why people dissociate themselves from their national governments is because, rightly so, they think that their governments alone cannot actually tackle climate change. So why would they vote? Why would they vote? Why would they trust their government to address climate change alone? So how do we work together, and how do we stand for those values will be structural in the future.
So I know you're posing the questions. I want you to give us the answers. But I'm interested in something, so I want to challenge you on just one element of it, which is, say, that democracy is hard work. We have to work harder at democracy. I think, and excuse me for being crude, democracy's story used to be basically that in the aggregate, it was everybody won. You had big winners, but then you had little winners. Minority parties in democracies were also winners, because in the aggregate you move things forward, and at the end they had a chance to do it. Today's toxicity in many liberal democracies, in a zero-sum, to the death view on competition, means that notion of we have to work harder in democracy just doesn't sell well, because you have too many people who don't believe that modality is real, because they lose so big. That's their perception anyway. So I'm just interested in any insights you have on that. Do we have any models or any experiences where nations that have reached that level of toxicity have come back?
Well, there are examples throughout history, but if you want recipes for success, again, some of the challenges that we're seeing, like rising inequalities, are not linked only to what's happening at domestic level, but are linked to really global trends. And these trends can only be addressed together. And this is why, the agreement of yesterday is such a big success for democracies, is because it is about also reducing inequalities, inequities globally, through the democratic system, through democratic nations working together. And of course, we're bringing other nations at the same time. But a lot of those challenges will have to be addressed about how democracies are able to join up and address these global challenges that actually have an influence on people's lives every day. So that's one big thing.
Marta, you sit in Warsaw. I don't know if Poland's going to get to go to the Summit for Democracy or even appear online.
They got the invite.
What's that?
They got the invite, so
they
got the invite.
Oh, they did get an invite?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. I did not know.
I'm not aware of
I don't think anybody's aware of that. So that may be real news, folks, and that's going to start a lot of controversies, because I think there are countries like Poland, Hungary, India, Turkey, which have been on the line. You see Tony Blinken's tweets, and profound thanks to Turkey after the mess in Afghanistan, calling them a dependable and stable and important ally of the United States. The rhetoric has completely changed because it was not about democracy per se, but there was a kind of a much more tentative treatment of Turkey at the beginning of the Biden administration. So you can kind of see the up and downs of these things. But let me ask you this, and I know there may be some sensitivities here as you're in another big tech platform, but we've just had the most riveting testimony that I've ever seen about large transnational technology platforms in the U.S. Congress this past week, with Frances Haugen kind of sharing information in her perspective and view and data, and thousands of pages of material showing that Facebook profits from sowing division and dissension, and her concern about child safety, her concern about what this does to stoke deep divisions. Now, I have to say that if we've been having this discussion 5 or 10 years ago, I don't think we would have, well, maybe 5 years ago, we still would have been talking about it, but less knowledgeably because of the testimony. But I guess my question is, I know you believe, and I know many people at Google believe, that it has to help implant and embed democratic values. But let's just say Google was born in China and not the United States. I think one of the interesting questions is, how skeptical should we be of your industry?
Thank you for an easy question. But I'd like to be in fashion, and before I go into this, huge big up to the OECD tax agreement. And I think that's the best example of multilateralism that is back and that is working. So one of my messages to your question that you didn't ask me about refueling liberal democracies is that don't panic. Things are starting to work. But going to your question, I don't feel I'm in a position to very concretely comment on Facebook and the testimony, but I can talk about my experience from the past few months where all these conferences and gatherings are back. Each and every foreign policy or tech policy conference would be hosting 2 panels. One panel would be about how do we want to prevent ourselves from threats coming from China and Russia, and then we all send a message. If we feel we're at risk, we should be strengthening our alliances, we should be coming together. And then in another room, usually in parallel, so you can go to both, you're getting a panel on are tech platforms a threat to democracy. And I think these panels should be hosted in one room. And I think, speaking of being scared of the industry and the differences between being born as a tech company in the US and China is that you would never look at US tech companies as subjects of weaponization, which you see in China. And these are 2 different realities. And the fact that, of course, there are issues, and the choice is not between regulation, no regulation, but finding a way to figure things out. And we're at a time when a ton of issues associated with platforms is on the top of the regulatory agenda, but it's not that they have significantly increased. We are the last industry that hasn't got sufficiently regulated. It's good that we're having this discussion, and everyone is aware that things need to change. But the same fact that you have a testimony in the US Senate sends a message that we're most likely on a way to get issues resolved. But we are under the scrutiny of regulators, and we can solve the issues in order to brace ourselves and be able to respond to external threats, because I strongly believe that external risks to liberal democracy are incomparable with internal risks. And we've been for a long time, especially under the previous US administration, using high-level language because we didn't have partners to talk to. So all we had left was very high-level headlines. And now when you look into the detail, again, OECD tax agreement, who would have thought, a few months into Biden's in office, and I actually have a poll for the audience. How many of you are aware of the fact that the EU and the US launched a Trade and Technology Council 10 days ago? Okay, you're not representative because these are all foreign policy junkies, but it's still less...
I just want to say that I was aware of it because you told me to be aware of it in notes earlier.
But it's still like, it's a group of of policy junkies in the
Yeah.
room, and it's less than half of the room.
Can I ask you a question about it? I mean, one of the big divides that's developing, and I don't know how it's going to go, but if you talk to members of Congress or the Senate, even the administration, about what the defining challenge of this time, it's going to be how to figure out how to compete and deal with the rise in competition from China. And that really, I mean, so that's, Huawei, that's across the board to kind of look at it. And I think one of the questions comes up is, what are the United States and Europe doing? And should you end up in a situation, I won't call it a Cold War, but a split in standards, a split in interests, a split in the way information systems work. My question to you is, if the EU, what can the EU and US do? Because when I'm familiar, if you look at where the future of the global middle class is, the net rise in that, it's not in the United States, it's not in Europe. And do you, by definition then, give China essentially carte blanche to harvest that rising global middle class tomorrow? So that's part of the stakes involved with failure. But I know in this multilateralism and the work there, I'd love to hear if Europe and the United States are aligning any way to prevent that future from happening. Marta?
I think this is exactly what's happening with the TTC, and things get boring. So you have 10 working groups that are addressing major questions, in my view, aimed at preventing that situation from happening. And I think we should be all approaching this with a lot of goodwill, with an open mind. And in the past few weeks, we've also seen different kinds of overblown reactions that show a little bit of impatience, but I think there is a lot to getting down to work again and getting out of the panel rooms, joining working groups, and working together. And technology here is a fantastic example.
Right.
It's not only us as tech platforms, but it's pretty much everything else.
Carl, I know you wanted to jump in.
No, I mean, the only way, you say Huawei, fairly easy to sort. You can buy Ericsson and Nokia.
Yeah.
Or you can buy Samsung. And that sort of answers the question also. We can't really stop the Chinese. There are 1.3 billion people that want to do better. The only thing that we can do and must do is be better than them.
But just challenge you on that. Ericsson and Nokia, if you talk to either of them, which I have at the highest levels, they will tell you the European EU is doing nothing to create financial export support, the kind of support that China has in position. China goes into small countries and says, we'll give you this essentially for free over, with a debt basis that's so low.
Sometimes. So we need to provide finance. We can do that. I mean, the number one problem that we have in Europe is that we have, as usual, a fragmented market. We are, in terms of 5G implementation, the Chinese are way ahead,
right.
Partly to a large extent with European technology, by the way, because that's the best one. Then comes the US, and Europe is lagging behind, in spite of the fact that we've been world leaders in this particular technology for decades. We invented it. But then we have fragmented market, and we don't have the depth of the capital markets, and the Chinese have been extremely good in inventing, in basic research and development, and then has to be said, the Chinese are ferociously entrepreneurial. Ferociously entrepreneurial. And we need to learn from that.
Let me ask you,
there's no reason, we are not genetically bad.
I want to go to the audience after the next question I pose to you, so I hope you'll think about your questions. But the other question I have, and it's sort of tied to two dimensions of it, is, when I used to be at the New America Foundation, we were hiring a lot of people in the terrorism game, right? So Peter Berg and others, and we would look kind of dismissively, not me, but others, at how news and information sort of traveled through conspiracy theories in the Middle East. That if you looked at the Middle East, conspiracy theories dominated the scene. Right. And it was like, that could never be us. Well, guess what? Guess what? Conspiracy theories are the currency of the day, in the United States, at least. I think in many, the propagation of disinformation, the institutionalization, the routinization of disinformation, and I know that Elsa, this is a big priority for you. But it's also part of the new form of conflict, that if you kind of, cross the line from economics to look at, what are the Russians getting really good at? Figuring out how to sow disinformation, plant disinformation. I think, to be honest, the United States used to be good at this in the 1950s. The CIA was really good at those covert games. I don't know where we lost our experience, but it seems we have. And I'm just interested, Ivan, as you look at it, as you look at just the governments in this neighborhood where you see it practiced, a lot of people, and we've known each other now for years, this is a constant theme. Why are we so slow? Why do we keep talking about it and there's so little action in actually creating a robust and effective neutralizer of disinformation?
Can I comment a little bit on what Carl has said, I think twice, and I agree with him when he referred to the Chinese extreme entrepreneurial approach and their aggressiveness in that and assertiveness.
Yeah.
He also rightly said that they have liberalized economy and therefore we see this increase of economic power. But I wanted to say that we'll see what consequence that will have over time.
Right.
Because my point here is, do you know why I'm such a strong proponent and champion of liberal democracy? Because I believe in its uniqueness based on the fact that it provides, like no other system,
right,
the highest level of individual freedom,
right,
while ensuring prosperity. And we know one thing about China, that they are economically doing very well. Nevertheless, over time we will see what consequence will have on this system the fact that they're not providing individual freedoms.
Right.
And therefore we now are almost panicking in view of this confrontation without them, where we are losing on many fronts, but we don't know what will come in 10 to 15 years. And because we don't know,
right,
the consequence should not be that we are less trustful, that we are less convinced of our own strength of those countries who believe in liberal democracies.
And your thoughts on disinformation?
The political problem is, Ivan Miklos is here as the reformer of Slovakia from the 90s and beginning of the century. The problem is that while we can believe in this, we are desperately incapable of transferring that message convincingly to our own electorate.
Right.
We have completely decoupled, and partly we're failing on making clear that liberal democracy is about jobs, it's about bread, it's about opportunities for investment. The independent judiciary, it's not an intellectual sort of, blah, blah. Without that independent judiciary, there will not be prosperity, there will not be jobs.
And free trade.
And free trade. And number three, I cannot agree more with what you have said, Steve, about us being extremely slow, but maybe you are referring now rather to European Union. It's slow because nationally we could be faster, definitely. We are not, but at the level of European Union, we should definitely do more, be faster. But, two, we should not underestimate the fact that we have things which nobody else has on a transnational level, and that is regulatory power.
Right.
That is that it's trade in European Union is an exclusive competence. Individually, we do not play any role when it comes to trade. Yes. So these strengths of us, European Union, should be something that should be embraced also on a transatlantic level. And therefore, I invite our American friends to do more with us on this, but together when it comes to our ability to set standards globally, as we did in OECD. That would not be possible without the European Union. That would not be possible without American leadership. That's fantastic.
Just as a
but
side,
definitely, but that's part of my unstructured answer to how to uphold the West, because this is at stake. And either these two parts of the West, while West does not mean geography, of course, that's obvious. It's a type of governance that has made us strong. So this is, I believe, a great challenge now. How to convince of our own belief in this, in these values, how to convince our own electorate, how to survive next elections with that.
Thank
the Prime Minister knows that.
Elsa, I know you wanted to jump into this on the disinformation industry.
Yeah, clearly disinformation is a very big destabilizing factor. And you ask why. Why have we left so many weaknesses in the system developed that then can be used either by internal destabilizing forces or foreign ones, right? Whether they are state or non-state. We haven't left them. It's the way the information ecosystems have developed. They used to be governed within national boundaries. And it's complex governance systems where government cannot really step in because otherwise it's Big Brother. So it's a complex governance system within national boundaries. Now the information ecosystems are global. So, and we haven't decided what form of governance we wanted at the global level, or at least among democracies. We haven't found the regulatory way of addressing the social media weaknesses, etc. So this is really, really hard work. But it's also a democratic trap in the sense that governments cannot alone step in and regulate the information ecosystems, because otherwise it's governments regulating a system that is supposed to be the media, that is supposed to be individual freedom, that is to be also calling into question governments all the time. So it is a trap in which we are, which has both a global problem and also just who is legitimate. Sorry, so who is legitimate in that setting to find the right governance system? And that's
well, let me ask Marta this. We were talking a little bit about digital growth and digital norms before, and digital growth needing democratic norms, excuse me, not digital norms, but democratic norms. But I guess the question is, we've heard the frustration about the government level inability to respond and control this. So they're more and more looking to civil society. We've also seen a period of time where, candidly, we've seen lots of governments failing to deliver, and there are some positive cases where the corporate sector is stepping in. Now, Facebook aside, do you see the possibility that there is an alignment and norms between a mega company like Google solving this problem for governments? I mean, Google has the ability to know whatever I'm thinking, whatever I want to buy. You have an ability to, with AI and whatnot, so you know who the evil people are out there trying to undermine democracies, right? You are the modern CIA. So I guess, my question is, can we expect more from you?
I'm starting to take it personally, Steve, but so I think, look, I don't want to sound very boring and corporate, but again, let's go back to the basics and the framework we operate in.
Right.
And I think the foundation of TTC emerges exactly because there is an ambition and there is commitment to find an agreement on the rules between biggest allies and leaders of the free world, and that being the European Union and the US. And the transatlantic relationship might have evolved over the years, and so has trade, but it has never devolved into a partnership without values. So self-regulation has progressed over the years, but we are at a time, and we're not oblivious to some frustrations that are specifically here in Europe, and getting governments on the same page and following their guidance is exactly what we should be doing. And Google was, I think, the first tech company to applaud the launch of Trade and Technology Council, and there are good reasons why this work should be progressing. One of them is because we do not, as the West we're discussing today, there is no pause button. Like the world is not going to wait. The world is not going to wait, and we need to make sure that we are aligned, we are on the same page. We're using our joint technological capabilities to act together against bad actors, and the time is now. And we've had a fantastic roundtable discussion yesterday about strategic autonomy. Many of you in breakout sessions discussed concepts of digital sovereignty, and it just sounds so off and worrying. So definitely, right to your question, we're definitely committed to be part of this conversation. We're going to bring in whatever we know and whatever we believe in, but certainly there needs to be a clear agreement between Europe and the US.
Thank you for that. Minister Korčok.
The issue was disinformation, right?
Yeah.
I agree entirely with you, with Marta, that governments can never do it without major platforms being part of that endeavor to cope with disinformation. However, the political mistake is to believe that we can outsource that entirely on them.
Right.
Because I think, based on my experience from my own country, I believe the major source of disinformation which does influence political perceptions in Slovakia, which costs thousands of lives because of disinformation campaign around vaccination, does not come from dark pages. It comes from the politicians themselves. I mean, Google cannot help us. Facebook cannot help us either. If a member of a parliament is a major source of disinformation, confusing people and making them hesitant about vaccination as, I believe, the only recipe how to deal with that. So, again, in each and every issue that we are discussing here, it's about political responsibility. It's about our resistance to temptation to come up with simple solutions to very complex issues, be it disinformation, be it climate, economy, and so on and so on. So I believe it's not that easy for politics just to say, okay, it's Google, it's Facebook, and it's us politicians who are responsible on
Carl, I want to give you, before we go to the last word on this, but I'd love to ask you just a little twist, and, particularly with your role with the European Council on Foreign Relations. I think one of the really big questions out there is whether in this world of disinformation, of hybrid conflict, there has to be deterrence. There has to be the ability to deploy what some are doing to liberal democracies and be able to deploy that or something else painful to the so-called them. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on the hybrid nature. I mean, there's disinformation that's organic and authentic, of the kind that Ivan talked. There's also deployed disinformation. So your thoughts?
Well, first, genetically, I'm skeptical or negative, to be precise, against governments deciding which information I can access. I mean, I'm coming from Sweden. We have one of the strongest traditions of freedom of speech in our constitution that you find all over the world. And I think that has essentially served us extremely well. Right. Have we had disinformation? Well, I would argue, I've been through a couple of election campaigns. I've lost one, I've lost some, I won some. I would say that most of the propaganda, evil propaganda of my political opponents, have been based on disinformation. That happens to be my slightly subjective view, and they would accuse me of the other thing. I mean, what is the truth? The truth is something that is established gradually in a free and open society. And I do think that this is the greatest asset of the West. Taking into consideration that what is the truth is often not entirely obvious. And there are different values that people have different sort of priorities to in different parts of the world. I mean, there's talking about sort of the value in our decadent societies and whatever we are accused of. Well, go back a couple of decades a couple of generations in our own societies. And we were far more conservative when it comes to these particular values. And large part of the Orthodox and large part of the Muslim world are, we would say, behind us, or far more conservative in their value system. The Confucian value system, somewhat different. What is the truth? I don't know. And then I've been dealing quite a lot with global internet issues over the years, and fighting in the UN against the Russians and the Chinese and the Saudis and the Iranians, because they always introduce resolutions in the UN, they still do, calling for information security, calling for internet sovereignty, calling for regulation on the global level of information. And they are in favor of that. Closed societies are. And I think it is lethally dangerous if our societies go down that particular path. What is then the counter-strike, as you said? What is the deterrence? Well, the deterrence, to be slightly simplistic, is the truth. I remember if you go to Prague, there's this flag on the top of the Rachin castle with a slogan, truth prevails, I think. You have the local version of it.
Pravda vítězí.
Yeah, quite. I was always impressed by that.
Uvidíme.
Right. We should never
I think it's a really, I just went to the audience who's running out of time, but I would just simply say to you, Carl, that's a very, very important, profound way to look at it. But I would tell you, if I were an African-American person for the United States from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and knew that my grandparents had been displaced or killed in the 1921 Tulsa massacre, which almost no one knows about because it was blotted out from American history, and until it was brought back recently, we're all shocked and say, how were we victims of historical amnesia? You know, you just realize that truth to some people is a cartel stacked against them. You know, if you are a military family that served in the Midwest of the United States over generations, all the wars, and you fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, your job was shipped off to China, you know, the view they say is we fought all these wars, we fought the Cold War, and China won. So to a certain degree, truth is negotiated, and that's what's going on, and we don't have good answers.
Truth is something that evolves over time.
Yeah.
We reinterpret history all the time. I don't know the details about the Tulsa massacre, but if there had been government regulation of information in the US 20 years ago, it would have been banned, probably.
Right.
We have a debate in certain European countries have certain traditions on the Holocaust, and Holocaust denial, for example, which is a fairly central issue to European history, to put it in the mildest possible way. And I've been very much against legislation for Holocaust denial, because I think Holocaust deniers are best fought in an open debate, and they nearly always lose. While if you send them to the courts and send them to prison, the risk is always you make victims of them. And the same go back to sort of, I'm old enough to remember this thing called the Soviet Union, you might remember it.
Yeah. I do.
They were jamming all
I
of our...
started my career studying the Soviet Union, and it was not a good choice.
Well, it was a good choice, but sort of it disappeared, your market value from that point of view. They were jamming all of our broadcasts, of course, because they were afraid of the truth. We never jammed anything of them. We allowed all of the Soviet propaganda in our respective societies, because it was good to give us a laugh now and then. And eventually, of course, they lost and we won.
Right.
So just a
real short?
Okay. Yes. Whether we can, as you've asked, come up with some deterrence on the level of state vis-à-vis disinformation, I'm skeptical too. But I think, I'm absolutely certain that it would not be possible at all unless we provide for more resilient back home against that. And part of it is education.
Right.
And I think in this country, I mean, how can you deal with with disinformation, which in my view, the essence of it's not a technical problem, it's entirely political problem, disinformation. And it's a stupid thing to believe that you can resolve technically a political problem. And therefore I think we have to make us more resilient back home. Without education, impossible. Without stronger economy, impossible. Stronger economy without structural reforms, impossible. Because the result of it is that people lost trust into the ability of state to provide what they expect from it. Services, state, the education, healthcare, and so on and so on. And therefore people are looking for alternative truth, which is then provided, through internet, through demagogues and populists providing simple solutions. So it's internal resilience.
Well, look, folks, I hope you've been enjoying this, because we went a little bit further than I want to, but I want to take a few questions, really lightning round, no long talks, because we don't have time. So, Roland, I'm going to go to you, but real brief. Let's get a mic up here. Really, really brief over here.
Last 2 seconds.
And when you get them a mic, please use the right end.
All right. Roland Freudenstein, Vice President of GLOBSEC and Head of GLOBSEC Brussels. Okay, we haven't mentioned China in 15 minutes. Yeah, real brief. How about talk about this transatlantic train wreck at the moment and the lack of unity of the West? Putting China in the middle and not emphasizing our differences as Europeans to the Americans about China, but emphasizing what we have in common. If you remember earlier this year when Merkel and Macron went out of their way to emphasize that Europe is not going to take part in a power struggle between the US and China and so on. Yeah, we're never going to be identical.
We didn't talk about it for 11 minutes.
I would love to continue, but okay.
And over here, our member of parliament. If everybody doesn't know, this is actually a very cool dude.
Thank you very much. Andrzej Stancik. Thank you for the introduction. I don't have to do it anymore. My question is about regulation of social media, because it's like a Columbo's wife. Everyone keeps talking about her, but no one has ever seen her. And my question is that you were talking about disinformation, and sometimes it's blatant lie. But most of the time, they just highlight some aspects of reality while neglecting the others. So they create a very different narrative from the truth. So my question is, how can we regulate that? because there's always going to be very
Great.
successful demagogues.
Thank you. And right here, I'm just going to cluster these because it's the only way we can do it.
Very much, Martina Malakova. I love this political responsibility to change, to make the world better. But my question is, do you think that now the big companies as Facebook and Google don't become the politician?
Okay, great hand right here. And I'm not going to be able to get to everyone, I apologize. But yes, sir.
Nigel Baker, British Ambassador to Slovakia.
Are you having a good time here?
A lot. A very great time. Great time.
We like
and I'm not going to talk about AUKUS. But I just wonder whether Carl Bildt's rather underestimated the sort of systemic challenge of China.
Right.
China is keen to set the rules in a lot of places.
Yeah,
you touched
right.
on that. Regulatory diplomacy, it sounds really dry, but in space, internet, many other areas, there's a real challenge for that. And I think that's an area where the West needs to be marshalling its resources.
China again, I'm going to take the lady in the very back. And then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you very much. Georgina Wright from the French think tank Institut Montaigne. I have a short question, but it might require long answers. We might not have time. But one of the key problems with misinformation is that people have not only become anti-political, they've become anti-system. And you've touched upon it. And so they believe...
Did you say anti-system?
Anti-system, yeah, where they think that the government is only serving a particular elite. They don't believe that the state is serving them. What do you do to restore trust in the system at this time?
Great, thank you. So we have a set of questions, and I'm going to start with Elsa to take those that she'd like to respond to, particularly the last one.
Okay, how do we restore trust? I mean, we're working hard on that and trying hard. But I want also, at the same time, because I think it's the same question, to also rebound a little bit on what was said a little bit earlier. And that's based also on your question earlier, if we think that self-regulation of the tech companies is going to solve the issue, we're also missing the democratic challenge of accountability to the people.
Right.
The accountability to the people is in the government, is in the parliament. The question about disinformation is really how do we build resilience in society? Part of it is education, indeed. Another part is also about the media and civil society, who are the ones who are supposed to make advance what is the truth. So it's how the governments act so that they empower better society to fight myths and disinformation. But governments are not out of the picture. They cannot be, because the forces are too strong now, because technology has changed, and because the forces behind disinformation that undermine trust are actually very, very strong. It's not the same ball game as before. How do you restore trust? There's this part. There's a big part about the democratic system itself, how it's functioning. We have a little bit underworked, I would say, the democratic system in the past 20, 30 years. There are lots of things to do about participation, representation, etc. And the final one, because I actually think it's the most important one, is how governments address democracies, how they address together the big challenges that are global, where they cannot act alone. That's, for me, the most important.
Thank you. Marta.
So I'd like to pick up on two questions, one on where is the regulation of social media, and I think this is going to address the question of whether or not tech companies are in any shape or form political players. So top priority regulation of EU institutions at the moment are two acts. One of them is Digital Services Act, another one is Digital Markets Act. And these two are going to profoundly change or shape how platforms are going to operate. That comes with a very long set of new obligations, changes to how platforms are going to work. And this is becoming very real. We're talking months to conclude the process. So again, when you step back from headlines and you actually go to a working level, there is a body of work happening. And to the question of whether or not we are political players, the fact that companies are the subject of this regulation, I think pretty clearly speaks to why we should not be considered political players. There's still a lot of regulatory scrutiny, both in Brussels, capitals in Europe, and Washington, DC. So certainly no space for us to have a seat in the UN for now.
What is Google's favorite country to operate in?
Slovakia, is that the answer?
Carl, your thought? Take your pick of questions.
Yeah, two questions. I mean, first on the regulatory, I completely agree. I mean, the Chinese are sort of very aggressive. I don't really blame them. They were coming from nowhere in the global economy. We set all of the standards, all of the regulations. They say we want to be at the table. And fair enough, that's going to happen. But so we need to step up the game. And it's the entire ecosystem of how you set standards and regulations is a very complex one. I've even sort of shared a report on that for a couple of years ago. We need to do more.
Right.
But we can't stop the Chinese. They are there. And they are, to a certain extent, in certain of these technologies, very, very successful. And that needs to be taken into account. The critical question, how do we restore legitimacy or trust? By delivering. By delivering to our citizens. If the Chinese are successful, or the Chinese regime, I don't know how popular they are, but because they delivered economic growth, they reduced poverty, they gave an element of pride to the Chinese nations after a long time, fine. We need to do the same. And there's no reason whatsoever, why open societies and open economies should not be able to do better than them long term. But we need to be proud of what we do and be able to deliver the digital transition and the green transition, all of this. It's perfectly doable with some sound political leadership.
Thank you. Ivan, I'm going to give you the last word to wrap up all these, and also there were many great questions out here, but there was both Roland and the British ambassador's big question. I would even put it bigger on how to think through the China challenge and the differentiate. I mean, what Roland said is the differentiation out there.
I take a question here from a colleague. She asked whether social platforms are or have turned into politicians or something like that. Of course not. Of course not. They're not elected, but they do have huge political impact. They're part of political life. In addition, I dare say, now we are almost obsessed and rightly so preoccupied with how to regulate them. But can we say that social platforms, they're consequence and product of freedom, and they are making our lives all better at the end of the day? Could you imagine how our life would look like without them? So it's not only about looking at the negative part of it, and therefore my point is we have to have a balanced approach to how to regulate them at the end of the day, because if we overdo that, then I think we'll lose part of a good thing that they are producing. And Roland, about China, I mean, we can discuss that, but that would be already beyond the limits of our panel, which I found very inspiring.
What I found
and fascinating.
Really, incredible conversation. I want to thank everybody in the audience. I wish we had could have gone on more. And I just say in terms of an element of humility on our parts, because sometimes America gets talked about too much, but this Summit for Democracy, which will be coming up, I read, what the State Department and the White House were saying it's about defending against authoritarianism. We have January 6th to contend with. Fighting corruption, we have the 2008-2000 financial crisis to contend with. It's raised this interesting question that as we sit and promulgate and sort of talk to the world about aligning democracies, how crappy we have been in America, even about maintaining our own democratic scaffolding, right? So, and foundation. So I wanted to just put that on the table, that this, as Elsa said, is very, very complicated and difficult. But I have to tell you that unless we get gravity to go in the right direction in these ways, and unless we make it easier over time, that's the natural default, I think we have some real problems. So I really appreciate everyone's candor. I want to thank Elsa Pilichowski, Carl Bildt, Ivan Korčok, and Marta Poślad. Marta Poślad, great. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Now I want to... And as we leave the panel, I want to invite Vazil Hudák to come up and give us, he helped put this thing together 10 years ago. And I want to say, again, on the 10th anniversary of the Tatra Summit, congratulations for developing this fantastic forum. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephen. And of course, it's a teamwork. It's not about one person. It's about all of us working together and enjoying this time together. So I always have this very difficult task to try to summarize a very rich discussion that we had yesterday, today, come up with some conclusions. So please bear with me for about 5-10 minutes, and I'll try to do it. I will start with some statistics. I think numbers, they always talk for themselves. So we had about 250 guests from 20 countries. So I think quite an achievement during this still kind of post-COVID time. We had about 50% of this number from business community. So it's a great achievement because we are always trying to create a truly public-private platform. And this is very important that we have both sides, public and private, coming together. 37 speakers, 33 focus group speakers, 7 young professionals. Actually, if they are here, I would like to welcome them. We have this wonderful program for young professionals from Europe as part of GLOBSEC, and it's great that they can participate with us in these discussions. And 20 journalists, I think also very important that we have media. Some interesting facts, as you already know, this was the 10th anniversary, so we are getting to the next decade of Tatra Summit, and I think this is wonderful. For the first time, we had a special train, GLOBSEC train, which brought many participants here. And I spoke with the Minister of Transport of Slovakia, and he promised that next year it will be again a train ready to come to Tatra Summit as well. Sometimes we are here in this beautiful environment, and we are not thinking about the world kind of around us. But actually, we reached over 50,000 people via social media. I think also very nice. The most viewed was the first panel, the introductory panel, and we had over 1,100 unique viewers from 35 countries. So I think this is a great achievement. Maybe one area where we should get better, this is gender balance. We have 35% female, 65 male, so this is something we will certainly work on and make it better. So some of the statistics, but more importantly about substance. I think we had very, very rich substance. As you know, the title of this Tatra Summit was European Economy Rebuilt after COVID and how we do it better. I think when we look at where we were 1 year ago at the Tatra Summit, we were expecting, or we were worrying what it will be like in 1 year, what 2021 will look like. There were different quite negative scenarios, what we may have, crisis, unemployment, companies, especially small, medium enterprises collapsing, etc. Actually, we don't see it. I think the picture is very nice. I mean, European economy is growing. Globally, we are in very good shape. So this is wonderful, and this is an opportunity to rebuild in a better way. And this was the focus of today's discussion yesterday and today. We have also massive financial support, probably the biggest in the European history. Supported by the EU Next Generation funds, by the resilience funds, by the accommodative fiscal policy, very low interest rates. I mean, all this is really wonderful and great opportunity for governments, for countries of Europe and in this region to invest especially into innovation. And I think this is one of the main messages, how we do it, how we rebuild, and this is by supporting innovation. Without innovation, Europe, but also, and in particular this region, cannot be competitive and cannot grow into the region which is good for the people, so they can stay here, especially young people, and don't have to find opportunities outside. I think there was agreement that there are 2 primary pillars for this innovation approach. This is in line with the EU strategy, so it's green and sustainable economy on one hand, and digitalization. I think there was a very good discussion about how to support the innovation by supporting disruptive technologies. Disruptive technologies is something that has to drive us, and I would say that we should focus especially on those technologies which can be scaled up to the infrastructure level and on the cross-border level. And I think this is a great opportunity also for this region, whether we are talking about the battery value chains, based on sustainable approach, so-called C2C, as Tara calls it, from cradle to cradle, from the production, mining production to recycling, or using microchips, innovative microchips to support data storage centers with energy reductions. So these are all opportunities which we have to utilize. Energy transformation, energy transition was a big subject, also because of the huge increase of prices for electricity, for gas. I think this is also a result of the major changes we see. As we know, those elements which provide in the energy system base load production, which are very much based on fossil fuel, whether it's coal, gas, etc., these are decreasing as part of the decarbonization process. The renewables, which are intermittent, are increasing, and this, of course, creates sometimes disequilibrium in the energy system. It's part of the transformation process. I think the big question for Europe will be whether we are going to deal with this issue, this increase of prices by, I would say, reducing our efforts of moving towards decarbonization, or rather increasing and speeding up the decarbonization. And I hope it will be the latter one, because this is the only way forward. One issue which was also mentioned by everybody and where we have to do much more are skills and education. Education is the necessary component for pro-innovative environment, and unfortunately, Central Eastern Europe, this region is falling behind. It's a huge problem. We have to really focus on this. Innovation has to be supported. I think this was also a very important message that this region, unfortunately, does not provide enough support for innovative companies, and we need policies which would support innovation, innovative companies, which would also be able to transform the huge amount of money which is coming from different public sources to support for such companies. And last but not least, I think for me, one of the major initiatives, and probably we could call this Tatra Summit number 10, is the Danube-Tech Valley. I think there was a general agreement that this cross-border regional approach is the way how the relatively small economies of this region can multiply and maximize their opportunity to be a innovative and competitive part of Europe and global economy. And I think it's very important. We had this wonderful example of Arkady Dobkin, where he had to build his huge company in the United States. And I think our challenge is to make sure that people like Arkady can do it in the region itself. And this is, for me, the main focus of the Danube-Tech Valley. And this is where also GLOBSEC, with the governments of the region, will be working on. So what to do next? I think we need to improve on gender balance, which we will do. Also, we need more people, more representatives from real economy, especially from the new economy, from the high-tech and digital companies. I think if we want to discuss innovation, we need more input from those people. And last but not least, I would like to thank all of you, especially. Also, I would like to thank our partners. We have strategic institutional partners, the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic, and I would like to thank Ivan Korčok, the Minister, for your support here, institutionally, but also financial. Thank you very much. Minister of Finance of the Slovak Republic, we had quite a strong representation here. I don't know whether any of the state secretaries are still with us, but thank you very much for your support, both financially, but also in terms of substance. European Investment Bank, Liliana, thank you so much for coming here. Ministry of Transport and Construction of the Slovak Republic, and National Bank of Slovakia. And, of course, corporate summit partners, Raiffeisen Bank, VUB, ABB, Inobat, IPM Group, Google, Slovenská sporiteľňa, Slovnaft, and Unifarma. Thank you all, and thank you for your private support. And, of course, huge appreciation to all of you for coming here, being with us. Hopefully this was a good, pleasant time spent here, both in terms of ambiance, but also in terms of substance, getting to know each other. I do believe that the informal part of Tatra Summit is at least as valued as the formal part and discussions. And obviously, we are looking forward to meeting here again next year. And of course, I should not forget about thanking GLOBSEC people, GLOBSEC staff. They did a wonderful job, and I believe we all agree that they are a really wonderful team. Thank you and appreciation. So thank you very much. I don't know, Robert, if you are the boss here. So that's it. Okay. Thank you very much.